What's up, y'all? Dr. Sherrod Robbins here, constitutional scholar and founder of Con I. And I'm here to bring you another edition of Con Questions. For today, we're going to look at the three branches of government. Now, in today's political world, where there are some challenges in the court and there is this pushback in the executive branch and this sort of stalemate or almost like a pause button in the legislative branch where the Congress lies, I think it's beneficial to unpack a little bit about what the three branches of government do, a little bit about who they are, and sort of ease and parse out where the tension is between the three. So I've gotten some questions since our last Con Questions on the executive orders. If you haven't seen that, go check it out on our YouTube channel. And I want to make sure I can bring you some insight here on the three branches of government. So without further ado, Con Questions, Three Branches of Government edition. Let's go.
Now I ain't looking for handouts, I'm looking to stand out. Got the vision coming, watch how it pans out. I've been writing my plans down, trying to stay focused, put out the notice. Who the GOAT is, me hands down. Yeah, no time for arguments, I cut out the politics, no. It's on my competence, I could cause your apocalypse. Ambition, it ain't for the weak, get it even when I sleep. Ready and willing, what you ready to say.
But I'll find a way, with or without your aid. Oh, you try to make me stay, now there's nothing you can say.
Question 1. How long has the U.S. Constitution been in existence? The United States Constitution has been in existence for 238 years as of 2025. The Constitution was written in the summer of 1787, and here we are 238 years later in 2025. The Constitution was ratified, though, 237 years ago in 1788. This is when the states officially agreed to the passing of such a document. It required 9 states out of the 13 to get quorum at the time. However, the Constitution was first put into practice 236 years ago, when George Washington became the first president of the United States and enacted the Constitution with the first Congress of the United States as well. And for what it's worth, the Bill of Rights was put into practice 234 years ago, when the Constitution added that in 1791. Question number 2. What is unitary executive theory? So the unitary executive theory is a theory that's been around for a while. It dates back to the Reagan administration of the 80s. And it basically suggests that a sitting president has complete authority over the executive branch, free from intervention of the legislative or the judiciary branches. In other words, if the president wants to direct the Department of Justice or Homeland Security or Agriculture and all of its offices and agencies to do something, then the president should be able to do those things free from intervention or interruption of any other government force or branch. Question number 3. How do checks and balances actually work? At a basic nuance level, it works like this, and bear with me because I'm going to break this down into the three branches of government. Let's start with Congress, all right? Congress is the body of governance that makes laws for the land. And before these documents become laws, which generally requires a presidential signature, they are called bills. These bills are created in either the House or the Senate, and then they're sponsored by a member of the opposite house as well. And then they move forward after passing committees and passing votes to land on the president's desk for a signature. Article 1, Section 8 grants Congress a list of powers through which they can create these particular bills that hopefully turn into laws. And Article 1, Section 9 puts limitations on the powers that Congress actually has as well. All bills must be written within the context and the confines of congressional powers, those things that are given to them in Article 1, Section 8. And all of the bills that are written by Congress must be constitutional. The executive branch then executes, see the word, these laws passed by Congress in any manner that faithfully and constitutionally makes sense for them to do so. This includes creating agencies and positions, hiring staffing, and also allocating funding as appropriate. Most importantly, though, as a check on Congress, the president can approve or disapprove any bill that reaches their desk in the form of what's called a veto. This is important as a reminder to Congress that you can't just pass anything because it feels good for the moment or because it is a part of a partisan agreement of some sort. This is done as a way to balance the relationship between the legislative branch, which is Congress, and the executive branch, in this case, the President of the United States. Now, as a check on presidential powers, should the president veto a bill that was passed by Congress, that bill goes back to Congress, who can then pass the bill forward after a 2/3 supermajority vote in both the House and the Senate. This automatically moves that vetoed bill into law without the requisite of a presidential signature. The 2/3 supermajority vote in both houses of Congress is acceptable in the Constitution because it signals to the president and the rest of the country that there was a significant amount of support, at least ideally across the aisle, for this particular bill to become law, which essentially, of course, operates on behalf of the American people. One example of a bill being turned into a law after a presidential veto, and therefore without a presidential signature, is the National Defense Authorization Act of 2021, when the sitting president at the time, of course, Donald Trump, vetoed this and Congress decided to push back against it. And finally, this takes us to the judiciary. After Congress proposes a bill and the president signs this bill into law, it are the courts who can look at this particular bill, now law, and determine whether or not the language of this bill, now law, is in fact constitutional. The courts do this by making sure that this law is holistically constitutional, meaning that they're not just looking at this law from a specific lens, like how the Congress would look at the law from the powers of the legislature, or how the president would look at the law from the power of the executives. The judiciary, the courts, are looking at this law from a wide lens that incorporates legislative powers, executive powers, but also the impact of the people, the traditions of what language is in the law, and what this means for the United States as a whole. And as a check on the legislative and executive branches, the judiciary or the courts can determine a law to be unconstitutional, effectively halting its practice immediately. For example, at one point in time, a law was passed at the federal level called the Morrill Act of 1890, which essentially authorized states to create land-grant institutions separately for white students and for black students. However, in Brown versus Board of Education in 1954 now, the Supreme Court ruled that separate was indeed unequal and that a segregated environment in the schools or in public schools was unconstitutional. And this court ruling was an example of how the justices or the judges can take a look at the law and say, actually, this law is unconstitutional because of these various matters or various things here. As a check on the courts, though, Congress can pass a bill that the president can sign into law that makes the very thing the courts deemed unconstitutional, constitutional. As an aside, those land-grant institutions from 1862 and 1890 that sort of separated black and white education are now referred to as HBCUs, or historically black colleges and universities, and are still in existence today. Question number 4. Can the president run for a third term? This question in 2025 has got a lot of heat because the current president, Donald Trump, has suggested that he could run for a third term. And to kind of close the book on that, let me just say that the 22nd Amendment to the US Constitution clearly states that a president can only be elected to 2 terms. However, now this is important, so listen closely. The US Constitution in the 22nd Amendment says nothing about a former president running as vice president. So what could very well happen is someone like Donald Trump might end his tenure after this go around, these next 4 years, as president, and then run on the next ticket as vice president for whoever the Republican candidate is, and sort of maybe do a backdoor deal, which is not uncommon in American politics, to where the president decides to resign or step down, and then Donald Trump moves into the presidency from the position of the vice president. We've seen this happen globally, and it's definitely something that is not out of the question with this administration. Question number 5. Does the president have to adhere to the rule of the courts? Yes. One more time. Yes. This is not only the model, but the expectation of the President of the United States. Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution states that the president must take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Now, I'd like to believe, as problematic as these framers were, that they had a kind of person in mind to serve in the position of the president. Somebody who wouldn't require a sort of hand-holding or a level of clarity that would prevent them from being able to read between the lines. I think they had in mind someone whose ability to manage the gray was greater than elementary, which is why, despite maybe having faults and problems with past presidents, the language of take care that the laws be faithfully executed was more than enough for the past 44 people who held the office. Question number 6. Can the courts decide what a president or Congress can and cannot do? And says who? This is a good question, especially from the perspective of a separation of powers between the three branches of government. But we just went over checks and balances, and something or someone has to check the president, and something or someone has to check the Congress. And this is where the courts find a role. The courts can tell the president and Congress what to do to an extent through an 1803 case called Marbury versus Madison. I won't go into the details of this case, that's for a different discussion, but the reality is it grants the Supreme Court what's called judicial review. This comes from Justice Marshall. And judicial review basically means that the courts have the ability to look at a policy, a law, an action, and determine whether or not this is in alignment with the Constitution, in terms of what the Constitution's language is saying, the integrity of the Constitution, and the overall intent of the document. Therefore, if the executive branch or any of its agents, or Congress or any of its agents, passes or engages in a behavior or approach to something that in and of itself is constitutional, then the Supreme Court not only has the right to deem that unconstitutional, but also to make a ruling or a holding on how to move forward from there. This is important because James David recently came out with a post on X that said judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. We're not going to break down that nuance, but what I will say to you is, sure, judges can't tell the executive branch what and how to do something initially, but they can certainly determine whether or not those actions of the executive branch are constitutional, and then articulate what and how to do something. Question number 7. What is a nationwide injunction? This is really relevant right now and dovetails off of question 6 because a federal district judge, which is the first set of trial courts in the federal district court, has placed a nationwide injunction on Donald Trump's freezing of federal funding. And a nationwide injunction, aka a universal injunction, is basically that. It's a halt on a federal action in the form of a court order. It is issued when a judge at any level decides that an action of the executive branch is unconstitutional or has too great of a harm for the larger community than it does for the single act it's trying to protect. Along with Trump's freezing of the federal funds, another example of a nationwide injunction would have been, again, Trump's travel ban that he tried to place in his first run as president of the United States. Question number 8. Where do the numbers 535 and 538 come from in Congress? Good question. 535 speaks to the number of members in Congress. Broken down, that turns into 435 members of the House of Representatives and 100 members of the Senate. The extra 3 that makes up 538, not 535, is actually in reference to the Electoral College. The 23rd Amendment, ratified in 1961, gives the District of Columbia, or Washington, D.C., 3 Electoral College votes in presidential elections. However, they do not serve as a voting body in Congress. In addition to that, there are 6 total non-voting members in Congress. They don't count towards the 535, but they are present in Congress. I just named Washington, D.C., and there are 5 others that you can see on your screen right now. Number 9. What does it mean to call the Constitution a living document? Referring to the Constitution as a living document is our way of suggesting that the language of the Constitution adapts and adjusts to the era and the context to fit the society that it's in. That is to say that the interpretation of the Constitution in the 19th century can't possibly mean the same thing in the 21st century. For example, the Fourth Amendment protects American citizens from unreasonable searches and seizures by the police or government agencies. In 1800, that language was clearly interpreted as a physical violation of some sort, like patting down your body to identify something incriminating. In 2025, though, that could mean searching your digital data, your cell phone records, or even your Google Cloud to identify the same thing. In order to apply the Fourth Amendment to the present day, we must first see the Constitution as alive, a living document, or as fluid. Question number 10. What happens if a president does not adhere to a court order? Really good question and really timely. 4 things could possibly happen. Whether or not they'll happen is a different discussion, but here are the 4. In no particular order, by the way. First, Congress can move forward with the impeachment process, where the House of Representatives can vote to indict the president and the Senate can try the case. This happened twice to Donald Trump in his first term, and he beat both cases and was never removed from office. Second, the judiciary can order the U.S. Marshals to hold the non-compliant party or parties in contempt of court, thereby forcing them to engage in the holding or the ruling or the doctrine or whatever it is that the Supreme Court or the courts in general have urged the federal government or the executive agency to do. Third, and probably the easiest, the executive agency can just do the thing that was court ordered and everybody can go home happy. And fourth, there's actually you. I bet you didn't know that. You as an American citizen reserve the right to file what's called a writ of mandamus. A writ of mandamus is an application, which all writs are, requesting that the courts compel the executive branch or its executive agency to do their job. Writs of mandamus are not necessarily uncommon, but they're not common either. And especially coming from a citizen, it's not something we see all the time. Worse off, the courts do not have to accept this application if they don't want to. So if that writ goes before a conservative court with a conservative executive and legislative branch of government in terms of the parties that are there, it could be really difficult to get that moving forward. That's all for today. I hope you found some answers for what you were looking for. This is a very broad topic with a very narrow focus, and I'm sure there are tons of other questions you have, so please don't hesitate to send them my way, even if you want them to be on a different topic. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more con questions. Till next time.
Now I ain't looking for handouts, I'm looking to stand out. Got the vision, come and watch how it pans out. I've been writing my plans down, trying to stay focused, put out the notice. Who the GOAT is, me hands down. Yeah, no time for arguments, I cut out the politics, no. It's all my competence, I could cause your apocalypse. Ambition, it ain't for the weak, get it even when I sleep. Ready and willing, what